Welcome to the Textile Center, our neighbor who has graciously offered to host us as our library is filled with prep for NCECA. My name is Sam Longley. I'm the education coordinator at Northern Clay Center. And I'd like to welcome you and thank you for those of you attending here and then those that are joining us remotely. Before I hand it over to Angelica and Kristen, I would just like to tell you a little bit about the exhibition Triaxial Blends opening tomorrow night. So Triaxial Blends refers to a method of testing glaze ratios to develop new surfaces. Curator and artist Angelica Pozo parallels this concept by bringing 3 pairs of established ceramic sculptors together in collaboration. Triaxial Blends challenges 6 artists to enter the world of sculptural collaboration to embrace the elements of surprise, negotiation, and successful navigation of equal contribution, subject matter, surface treatment, and each other's creative experiences. Angelica Pozo roots her work in the natural world and incorporates themes of femininity, sensuality, fertility, and spirituality. Her latest work leaps from the Latin term lusus naturae, or freak of nature. She includes materials such as wire, glass, and cut nails in her work to create sculpture that seems to mock humanity and its reckless treatment of this planet and its environment. It's as if they scoffed, we evolved past recognition and survived you, and this new and ruined earth no longer supports you, but it suits us beautifully. Pozo earned her BFA at New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University in 1976, and her MFA in ceramics at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, in 1978. She is currently a ceramic public art and studio artist in Cleveland, Ohio, as well as an author, juror, and instructor. Kristen Cliffel's sculptural work and studio practice revolves around the topic of domesticity and emotional relationships. She investigates the faceted and often conflicted messaging we receive about home, fulfillment, expectations, and triggers about our inherent struggle to reconcile archetypal myths with our daily realities. Cliffel earned her BFA at the Cleveland Institute of Art, Ohio in 1990. In addition to teaching workshops at colleges and universities across the country, teaching sculpture and ceramics to high school-aged children, and participating in residencies and exhibitions, she is currently a full-time studio artist in Cleveland, Ohio. So please join me in welcoming Angelica and Kristen as they share about their experience creating Triaxial Blends.
Thank you. Okay, so I took some shots of the gallery today since you hadn't seen the show. I just start to give you a little sneak peek of the show. So here are a few gallery shots. And then, so that initially when I was asked, well, let's stop there for a moment. I was asked to curate the show. I started thinking about ideas for the theme for the show, and I was thinking initially of maybe something about botanic and platforms because that's my work. But Kristen and I had discussed a few years beforehand that we never get to see each other, and we just always are, ships passing in the night at show openings, or we just, just never got to really hang out together, though we'd known each other for over 20 years in Cleveland as part of the ceramics community. And so she said, if only we had a project together, then we're always working. If only we had a project together, we'd get to hang out. So that's when I started forming the idea of doing a show of collaborating sculptors. So I went on to invite Kristen Golden. I first asked Kristen if she was game. She was. So I then did not want to make arranged marriages. So I invited Kristen Golden to then invite her collaborator. And so she invited Susan Viner to collaborate with her. They did not know each other beforehand and before the show. And so they got to become very good friends during that and create work. And then I invited Sid Carpenter to invite her collaborator, and she invited Susama to be in the show with her. So just wanted to preface with that. And so tonight we're talking about Kristen and my collaboration. So you can begin with them.
So we live in the lovely, delicious city of Cleveland. I know you guys have all, wanted to go there for ages. It's so beautiful.
It is beautiful.
It is beautiful.
We're not being sarcastic.
We have a lot of industry and we also have a lot of nature. So it's a perfect place for me, getting to do both things. We're on the Great Lake, and we really eat it up. I really eat it up, and we enjoy the city life and the community and the arts there very much.
And so that my work, as Sam was explaining, has to do with plants and nature. And so these are, we're going to go back and forth between our work and different work that influenced our collaboration. I do a lot of public art commissions and different other things, so that my foray into doing sculpture sometimes is a little choppy, because I'll go away to a public art and then I'll come in. And so I have different series that I have. And so this one is reliquary. These are reliquary forms, and this is part of when I was using the vessel form as a symbolic of femininity. And then these are pieces that have a lot of volume, but there's only one tiny little opening. So I was thinking of in terms of conserving and a volume that would hold and save, and like seed reliquary, just like reliquaries. And we both have, we're not religious, but we're both Catholic raised, and so school raised, and so there's a lot of symbols in our work that refer back to that, and so that's this kind of symbolic of the femininity.
And the scale on these, Angelica?
It's about 2 feet. They're about 2 feet tall.
All coil built and low fire glazes. Beautiful. And my work began out in college and art school, and briefly after, just dealing with natural forms and also plant forms. So we're finding images and history that are connected by the things we were inspired by. So this pear is about 3.5 feet high. I made it my last semester of a 5-year program there. And then these pieces on the right, we like to grow together. I was leaving for residency at the Banff Center, leaving my boyfriend of 5 years, and he was staying in the city. So they have different cityscapes inside of them. So I was working large scale right from the get-go in clay, but also using different materials. And I started working with things that were in my life, and being surrounded by beautiful dressmaking dummies and having lots of clothes on them, like aprons in my studio. And then I started thinking and talking about, is that blocking the dress? Whatever. Thinking and talking about feminism, and thinking about the sort of lack of agency that these forms had with no head and no arms. The piece on the right, they're both life size, so that's my size, so about 5 feet. They would fit on me. The dress is filled with poker chips. It's called Lucky Gal. The piece on the left is plated steel in the back and pink and white clay in the front, and that's called armor. I was thinking about these as feminine armor. So I made a whole series of dresses and a whole series of aprons as feminine armor. That's great. Thank you. And then let's hope these work. Is this still working? Great. Okay.
And then these are shrine pieces. They're also about 20 inches tall, and wall pieces, and again using that feminine, that the vessel as a feminine form, fertility, and then having the different tree dedicated to different trees. The borders were simulating the texture of the tree bark, and there's mosaics around the form in the center. Actually, the one on the left, that's copper wire that I embedded in there under the glaze to give that pine needle effect that came in through the glaze. And then this is my shrine to the seasonal salad. This is about 5 feet tall. Sits in the wall, and has 5 niches in it. So 4 are for salad plates, and 1 is for a salad bowl. In the center, glass mosaic, illustrating the texture role references to the different seasons. And then on the plates, this is part of my picture postcard series, where I would paint an underglaze, paint an image of a scene, a landscape scene, and then have a background, vegetative background that related to the scene. And so in this case, they're all different edible flowers that would be found in different seasons, and that's what the salad plates have.
And those tiles are on our piece, right? Are those some of those
These
glass
are
tiles?
not from this piece. There was
Okay.
another.
So, when you're in ceramics, even if you're a sculptor, people are going to always ask you to make a teapot. So this is my answer to teapots. These are really functional, and they're all sort of life stage teapots, and I continue to do these when I am asked to be in teapot shows. I love an assignment. So just like this feeling like this was an assignment, the collaboration. So on the left, No Place Like Home, that tornado is where you would pour the water in. She pours out of her right hand. The bride, this is the time when I got married, and it was all about the cake. Actually, my husband was the bride, but that's the teapot for that era. And then the housewife on the right, she has gained some weight and doesn't even wear her ring anymore. Then I had children, which changed my practice drastically. I had been traveling across the country and teaching workshops and showing all over, and then these humans came out of me.
And then this is part of my Blossom series and this is where I started the Lucis Naturae term, where I found the jokes or freaks of nature term, Latin term, and started making big giant blossoms that might be menacing, and just thinking of the environment, and that, for all the horrible things we're doing to environment, plants and bugs and small forms will be fine. They'll evolve. They'll be able to survive. They might not sustain us. And then I started thinking, well, what if they got so menacing that they started actually attacking us or being able to come? And so that was sort of like a fantasy in the back of my mind as far as this series. But these are about 17 inches, 12 to 17 inches across. This was one of the first where I started using Canthol wire and embedding them into the wet clay, and then using glass beads. And I liked the gesture that would create, and then also the sort of ephemeral sort of form that those would create, the strings of beads.
After I had my first child, I was pushing him in the stroller down in Tremont, where Angelica lives, and some colleague of mine came up to me and was like, "What? You had a baby?" And I was like, "Bob, literally, last time I saw you, I was a giant house. I was out to here." And he's like, "Oh, I thought you had just let yourself go." And I was like, "Yeah, what a D." So I was like, "No, a human came out of me, and I was pregnant, Bob." So this piece is called Keep Up, Let Go. And it's also my height, but that prostrate position, being sacrificed to the fertility gods, that's really how I felt. I felt like my life was over and I was never going to make anything again. My kids did have cribs in the studio for their whole growing up. The bricks are stamped every now and then with keep up, let go, keep up, let go. So this was really a mantra. I was a brick shit house, but I was still allowing life to grow over me. My work is narrative and autobiographical, obviously, and it follows the trajectory of my life. So now I'm spending hours and hours every week at the playground. So these images come in, and I'm ready to leave my husband if I could. If the piece on the left is back and forth. I mean, he travels for a living. So I'm, stuck at home with these, creatures that need everything from me constantly. So this piece is really very literal. I would have taken that ring off and thrown it if I didn't have the playground, AKA the children. We have been married for 28 years. Don't get nervous. So Play With Me is on the right. So these are about this big. They're not huge, but they're larger than life and very sort of oddly macabre, yet delicious. Like having children.
This is an installation piece. It's about 12 feet across. And I was invited by Canton Museum of Art, Canton is a city south of Cleveland, to do an installation piece. And so I knew that was coming up, and this was a year after 9/11. And so that when I was planning this piece, I decided that I wanted to create a place of peace and calm and reflection. So that I knew I was going to have my own room for my piece. I asked them to paint the walls a dark, deep teal sort of color, and the lighting was just at the center, and so that, and there was a bench on the side, and they had some sound, different sounds. There was sounds and music, and so it was a place of reflection. And then it was styled after the rose labyrinth from the Chartres Cathedral, so that you can actually walk and do a walking meditation, so you can walk and step in, and it can just go back for a minute.
Sure.
And then our piece, the center of the mosaic from that, there's green glass mosaic that has gold flecks in it. So I had some left over that, and at a point at creating our piece, which you'll see, our Clara piece, I said, oh, I have this tile. And so some of the elements in our piece end up being from different other projects.
And I think all of we're specifically showing you pieces that we've made throughout our careers that we delved into discussing what we could come to terms, like how could we come to a middle ground? Because our works are so different, but we are fascinated by many of the same things. So are there rods in these? Those are bolted in from below. So this is where I started to use different ways to anchor pieces so that they would look like they're magically floating. So, we were talking about houses and temples a lot. So I'm showing a lot of house pieces, but I do, just follow the trajectory of my life with the work. During the housing crisis, this piece is called Swine Logic. So they're just tiles that are chunky and stick off the wall. There's some hand carved fences in there. So straw strewn, stick stuck, and brick broke. And we had a tough time that couple years with the housing crisis. I had been hit by a truck and couldn't work for 6 months, and my husband had an accident, and we were literally underwater. So this piece came out of that time too. So this is a large piece, maybe this big, and literally underwater, which I guess you guys all know that term. The students this morning don't, but we owed more than we could get out of our house with. So that having to be the mommy and keep my best side out. I've got that baby pool that's absurdly full on the top. But it was a struggle for a few years to really just keep things going. But I'm always relating that struggle in my work. There's a lag, but it comes out.
And this is a series continuing with the using the rod to kind of suspend thing. This is in 3 parts. The bottom part has a wooden base with the tiles on it, and then the base sort of form is pinned in, and then the top flared part is separate. That whole the Blossom series, when I started with the Blossom series, I started making up pseudo-botanic names for them. And
fake news.
Fake news. And so then this one, Josephyllus Mediopictus, the little fingers sticking out are clay pieces with canthal wire embedded inside of them and then stuck into the form so that they all stick out like little fingers. And the Josephyllus comes from Josephine Baker and her banana skirt. Josephine Baker was African-American performer that performed a lot in France, and she was famous for her banana skirt. So those remind me of her banana skirt, and Mediopictus was referring to middle of the finger, something. It refers to the little red lines in there. I have a book on botanic names and how that describe, and that has like a glossary, so that I would look at that. I know red flowers, okay, which one, so I would use that. And sometimes, and if those failed, I would just make something up. So this was also part of that series where I pinned things in and made them all kind of break. And then there's that little, the canthal wire to make stilts. I can just get those and stick them in, and I like to have they're little spiky little.
And then the scale on these again, Angelica.
That the last one is about this tall. It's a little bit taller. This one is more about this tall.
Nice. So when the kids started going to school, I felt more freedom in the studio, but I also was involved in a hell of a lot more bake sales. So they went to public school, and the baking has been a passion of mine for a long time, but it got out of hand and then came into the studio, of course. So the piece on the left was the first sort of successful baked good in the studio, and that is called Merry Go Round. Mary is in the woman's name, and it's maybe 3 feet high. Those are on the piece looks really delicious and fabulous, and people would look at my life from the outside and say, oh, you have like these 2 great dogs and this handsome husband and these 2 beautiful kids. And I'm thinking to myself, same shit, different day, round and round and round. So that was my take on that. I just sort of wanted to be free. It was difficult for me to just fully embrace motherhood. It still is, but that was the beginning of that. The piece in the middle is called The Dirty Dozen, and it's about 3 feet high. Those cupcakes are all really nasty things to say, but beautiful and delicious. So like the one with the wedding ring pick is, does this make me look fat? One says, you drink too much. I wish it was bigger. Can I get a timeout? How long is forever? So it's very nasty things that you can only say with a lot of sugar. At this point, I was going a little nuts and really kind of thinking about freedom versus responsibility. We used to play a game in the playground called Mr. Brown, what would you give me if I let you down? And if you were light, you were screwed on the seesaw. You know, your partner down south could get off and you'd have a broken tailbone. So that's the gist of this piece. The house is the fulcrum. And if I left or if he left, this whole thing would be out of balance. So this piece is wood and steel and clay, and it's about this big, so maybe almost 3 feet long. And Crystal Bridges owns this piece, and it toured the country for a year, which is fitting and telling for the state of marriage in this decade or whatever.
These were the first of the series that when I started doing these stemmed flower pieces, and I would have a base, and then I had a long thread rod, and I had different elements. So this is the precursor to the work that's in the gallery now, and this was at an NCECA show in Philadelphia, and it was at the in the Botanical Gardens there. So, and Sid Carpenter, she curated this show.
Oh,
so
I saw that show. That was juicy. Yeah, very juicy.
And then from there, well, to the left is more of that particular type, but then to the right are specifically when I started using the cut nails and raising them up, and just the concept of instead of soil and attached to the ground is sort of this detachment and from nature and attachment from their place and when making these. It's
interesting you talking about that, and like the way that I use grass as a symbol for domesticity, and you're using these like sort of earthen chunks as a space for something sort of alien to grow. It's similar and and not similar.
And that's, yes.
Yeah. So this piece is called Welcome Friends, and I think I discussed it with Zach a little bit today, but it's a wall piece, and a weird neighbor, a hilljack on my parents' property, built a shack illegally and had his Barcalounger and his 6-pack and his radio and his rifle out there. And a little fawn stuck its head in the window, which had no glass in it. And he shot it, just point blank, shot this fawn, and then went down to the bar and bragged about it to the whole neighborhood. And my kids found out and were just hysterically crying. And so this piece really came at a time when they were teenagers. They were becoming adolescents, and things weren't super safe and easy anymore, and there were no happy endings. Things were more complicated. So this is a sort of loss of innocence phase when they started drinking and having sex, etc. And those are oleander on the guns, which are a poison flower. Again, relating to the way you research your all of your names and stuff. I research every level and sort of all of the surfaces and all of the content visually that goes into the pieces. It seemed like a good idea at the time. We bought our house in the city proper, which obviously was not a great idea when we had to pay for public high school or private high school.
And then these are work that's before some of the work that I've just shown you, but earlier work, but in the sequence of what revealing our connections and the connection to Kristen's use of the home, the house and home. I had series where I was using temple and shrine, already shown shrine, but the architectural temple form. And so the one on the left is probably 31 inches long. and that's a totally enclosed. There's no opening or anything. It's a structure. The one to the right is in the collection of the American Craft Museum in New York, and there's a little opening. You can see a gold leaf hanging from the front. From the back, the opening is much broader, and you can reach in there. And I had eucalyptus leaves hanging there so that you can have an olfactory experience as well as viewing. And then this is another one of my temple series. These are more like 17 inches tall, and the lids do come off. So below the acorn row, that whole part comes off. And so it did function as a space to save something or conserve something.
The piece on the left is called We're Gonna Need a Bigger Boat. And I hope everybody knows that reference. Have you guys seen Jaws? Yeah, when they come upon the size of that fish, they're just like, oh, unprepared. When my son was a teenager, my toolbox was completely empty for that stage of his life. And I was floored by stuff that happened and emotional crises. And this piece happened over about 6 months. And that sense of complete imbalance and something going really wrong. Things worked out fine. He's alive and healthy, but those were troubling times. And the piece on the right, I've made wedding rings that were oversized my whole career since I was engaged, just this complete hyperbole of an engagement ring. And this one was really sweet. It was a sweet sentiment, not a salty one. And it's called Beacon. And it actually, the rings all come out on these series, but it was a tribute to my husband who really saved me through these emotional times. And actually the Weissman owns that. I do drink, so I am a recovering Catholic. I don't practice, but I still drink. So these are tequila cups on the left, and Mama's is the biggest. They come off rods. They all come out. So that's another functional thing that I do. The piece on the right is called It Was Hard to Get Out of the House in Those Days. And that was when they were teenagers. I'd have to take a picture of the liquor cabinet every time we went out on a date, air quotes. And I'd have to leave bowls of condoms on the dining room table. Like, I love you guys, but let's not procreate right now. So my kids did grow up with a crazy artist mother, but this is a few years after. This is 2017 that they were successfully kind of fledged and knew about safe sex and, no heroin, please. And so this is a tribute sort of to my home. It's called Foundation, and it's cast concrete, gold luster, and wood. And so I build all my own things, and I took a sewing class to learn how to sew, and I do all of that myself. I greatly enjoy process, and so as you do. So we both find such joy in process, and I think it shows in the work.
Mm-hmm. And then the rest of that I will be showing are some of my public art pieces, and this in particular, the glass from this is also in our finished collaborative piece. But this is 12 feet tall. It's outside of an apartment building for the Cleveland Housing Network. And it's an apartment building for homeless. So it has all efficiency apartments. So homeless people can apply, and they have to follow certain regimen to be able to stay in there. But I knew that piece was going to be going in front of that building. It was in a neighborhood. It is in a neighborhood in Cleveland that had other public art pieces throughout the neighborhood, and they had been trying to guide them all to reference some form of artwork. So they had one piece that was about quilts in one area. They had another one that was a big giant microphone. So it was about performance. And so then I looked at the collection. There was nothing about the written word. And so I thought that the written word would be good as an inspiration for the people living there. And I started with the poem, a Langston Hughes poem. Langston Hughes is the poet laureate of Cleveland, I Too America. And to paraphrase it is, I too am America. I sit at your table. Or I sit in the kitchen and I eat, and so basically it's saying that they can't be with the general, not invited into the general audience and or experience, but that I sit and I grow strong. I eat and I grow strong. Someday, soon I will be at the table, and you will see how beautiful I am, and I too I am America. So all the strips of color, those are 11 different excerpts of poetry. I asked an African-American local poet and I paid him I commissioned him to pick 11 different phrases from African-American poetry. I figured out how many characters and how long I had for each line of poetry. I told him, gave that information to him. And so he gave me those phrases, and I put them into the text. And so you have to walk around the piece at least 5 times to read a whole line of poetry. So you'd have to follow each color around, band around. And so the next year, I heard back from the people from that institution, and he was saying, he was interviewing one of the women who lived there. She said, well, I had been a drug addict, and I just love that piece. I go and I walk it every day, and I read a line of poem. And so that was very fulfilling, because that was exactly what I had intended and hoped for it. This is in the University Circle area of Cleveland, where not all, but a lot of our cultural institutions are, the Cleveland Museum of Art and Institute of Music, Natural History Museum, and such. And so the University Circle Incorporated, who is an organization helped to oversee all the different cultural institutions, was celebrating their 50th anniversary. So they gave me this PowerPoint, and I turned it into a mosaic. And so that this is the PowerPoint turned into mosaic. And then Stephanie Tubb Jones, who was a councilwoman, had died, who was very beloved from that neighborhood, had died suddenly of an aneurysm at the age of 57 while she was driving to work. And so was dedicated 3 years later on what would have been her 60th birthday. And so that they had planned to do something for the 50-year anniversary, but when she died, they decided to dedicate the Plaza to her, and then have their history on the bench there.
Oh, the iconization of Mother looms large in all of our lives, especially if you grew up Catholic, because you see the Virgin Mother everywhere. But when my kids were in high school, I know I keep talking about that just because of what I'm showing, but I definitely felt like they were trying to kill me. My son brought home 16 rabbits when he learned to drive, and finally got his license at 17 because he was such a late bloomer on driving. And he brought home 16 rabbits, and we live in the middle of the city, and we have 3 dogs and a cat. And you guys know what rabbits do, right? They're the most successful procreators on the planet. They only ovulate when they copulate, so that's why they're so successful. So we were swarmed with rabbits. They just bred and bred and bred, and we had a rabbit ranch, and it was just a hot mess. But when I kind of got through this experience of 5 months living with 1 million rabbits, I realized that my journey had just been taken over by fertility for all these years. And this was a specific rabbit, Aunt Cheryl. And she was amazing. She was a goddess. She had 7 babies the second day she moved to our house. Wow. Yeah, it's incredible. So she has a bronze crown with amethyst stones in there. But the boat is about this big, maybe 38 inches or something. And she just completely fills the boat. And that was what I was just internalizing, that, you know what? I'm not, and it was the end of my term of being the mommy. They were in high school and stuff, but the title is Pirate.
And this is one of my more recent public art pieces in Huntsville, Alabama. We gather here to honor, it is honoring 2 men who are very significant in furthering education for African Americans in Alabama. One is Dr. William Hooper Council. And he came out of slavery at the age of 17. And he, so at that time, there wouldn't have been any place for a Black person to be educated. So he found ways to get himself educated, got a law degree, became a lawyer, got a degree in ministry, became a minister, and went on to become the first president of what is now Alabama A&M University. And so he's very significant. And then the other person is Dr. Sonny Herford III, and he he helped desegregate the public schools in Alabama, nearly 10 years after the federal government had already stated that schools should not be segregated. they were still segregated in Alabama. And so he and 3 other families sued the Board of Education, Alabama Board of Education, through the federal courts. They won, but then George Wallace, governor, vowed to not allow it to happen. So he sent the National Guard to prevent them from going into the schools. And there was this whole big to-do about that. He was a physician, so when the phone rang, he had to answer his phone, and he was getting all these death threats. And he started then saying that he would answer the phone and just say, this is officer, blah, blah, blah. He would just fake out, and then they would hang out. But they, people who saw that scene, they said when they were walking down all the National Guard were there with their guns, and they're walking up to the school with his 6-year-old son, that there were other people passing by, civilians passing by with shotguns. He just got all these different threats. And so he survived all that. And so then they asked me to come in and make this piece to commemorate them. It was on a site, and I'm going a little bit longer into it because it's an interesting story. The site where this piece had been public housing, and probably the first public housing, at least in the South, for African Americans, because everything was segregated before. So that was built in 1952, and that site was right next to this big giant hospital complex. And so the housing authority, I thought, was really clever because they did not have the authority to commission public art, but they sold that property because it's valuable property, and they could build elsewhere. As part of the condition of sale, the developer had to pay for this piece that commemorated these 2 African-American men. And so so that's where I was brought in. And so there's a site that there's a lot of African-American history there. And so they wanted someone that could connect to the community and, give them some connection to peace. So I came up with this idea of using footprints, because footprints represent, as opposed to handprints. Handprints represent what we make, but footprints represent people's personhood, your independence, and your freedom to be able to walk. So I just thought that was a good symbolism there. And so I was down there for a couple of weeks, and I had a classroom, and people signed up, and they would come, and I would grab their foot and stick it in a bucket of glaze and place them on the piece. So all the way around is all these people's footprints. And because they did a little video, the city did a little video of that when Dr. Herford was still living, and his son, and so I could discern which one was his. So I was able to label. All the other ones are not labeled, but him and his son are labeled. So he was able to live to see this piece built, and he was saying things like, "Well, he said, I'm tickled to death for things what people used to spit on me for. I get commemorated." So it was very
amazing.
It was very amazing to be able to do that.
That's amazing.
When was it?
This was maybe about 4 years ago.
The date was here, right there.
2015. Yeah, 4 years ago.
So trajectory of my work just follows my life. There is a little bit of lag. This is called Getting There from Here. And the reason that I'm showing ladders is because we have ladders in common in the piece, in the gallery. But ladders are an amazing spiritual symbol, and I had a deep loss in my life, and this is a piece that came out immediately. So I love to carve wood, the wood that the ladder's hanging from monofilament from the ceiling. This ladder took about 9 months. It's millions of cherry blossoms, and the rondelle of grass is about, I guess it's 29 or 30 inches across, whatever the size of my kiln is, my biggest kiln. And that's all individual pieces of grass. That's really freaking fun to build. And I used to do something illegal while I was making grass that sort of is similar to grass, if you guys know what I mean. But I find that I just kind of make it much slower that way, so I don't do that anymore. But I had to make that darn thing twice because I had a really heavy lithium glaze that actually destroyed all the blades of grass. But this piece is called Sursum Corda, and my daughter is 2 years younger than my son. And when she left for college, or when she was in her senior year, I started making this. And it was really a meditation on leaving domestic space and trying to envision her being somewhere beautiful and better, and not dead, but moving somewhere beautiful. So that's about 5 feet. The ladder's about 5 feet high. So when my son went to college, in a brief moment of hubris, I built myself a freaking crown. And that is 20 inches across and so much gold luster that you could like buy a car with it. And the crown jewels are health and safety on the front. Those are immutable. And then love on the back, which is a heart. And then the other crown jewels that are movable between reigns, although I'm the only reigner in this kingdom, are home, the journey, which is the boat, celebration, which I believe deeply in, education, and then self-sufficiency. Again, I took that sewing class for about 6 weeks to learn how to make pillows. This is called Corona Factotum. Again, using boats because we're using those on our piece and we're trying to find common themes to show, but I do use boats all the time for journey. This piece is pretty recent and it's called The Navigator. And what I do find is that when I finally admit my faults and exacerbate them in the studio, the pieces are really authentic and true. This piece is also about 3 feet. It sounds like everything I made is 3 feet,
Yeah.
but I have no idea. This is where we begin our journey on collaboration, which I think was late April or early May last
Something
year.
like that, yeah.
And when she asked me, I was terrified. I was like, holy crap, I'm such a control freak. How can I do this? But yes, because I was the one that said, let's do a project together, because we're always running past each other at openings and drinking a half a glass of wine and then having to leave. And we're both so fiercely busy in our studio practices that it's hard to make time for friendship outside of family sometimes. And outside of what you have to do to get the bills paid. So we started, I think, at your studio drinking.
Yes.
Yes. We had lots of wine and very little food. And I don't know how I made it home that night. But anyway, this is Angelica's studio and her beautiful cat Cleo on the left. And this is my studio, my mom's space on the right. And that's my gorgeous girl, Gracie. And wow. Angelica's a genius. She's a measuring genius. You guys have seen all her tile pieces. So she comes to this project with all the math skills. And I was terrified when she got all of her rulers out. I was like, I'm just going to pour another glass of wine.
Architectural scale out and started measuring. So we can do this.
Yeah, we're thinking about scale, and we had some very grandiose plans.
Well, we went through many different iterations of what the piece was going to be, and then it's totally different. But these are some notes that I just photographed because the nuggets were always there. Shrine, iconization, what do you treasure? What do you iconize in your studio practice? What do you iconize in your life? What do you deeply value? What are you afraid to give up? What are you afraid of? So these themes kept coming up. And finally, we made so much shit that we didn't use. But both of us are grounded in process, like of course all of you are. And so making alleviates too much thinking for both of us. And through making, we finally... Because then we could be together, it's like, okay, we're not exactly, let's start making this. I think we're going to do that, so we just started making things to work out what it is that we're going to make. And then somebody was asking me in the and it might have been when I was talking to Joy, but I remember it was in the gallery and explaining how the different, and it might have been that other teacher that I was on, but anyway, how the different stages of decisions and how did we resolve when we got to a certain point. I think it was when we were talking to Joy, and it seemed like we had different interruptions that like if you had vacation, I caught pneumonia. There were different times that we could not be together working, and it seemed that once we got back together, it gave us time for that all to percolate, and then we would be able to leap into the next. So rumination is the gift of procrastination, and we weren't really procrastinating. This was always on the back burner, and we would stay in touch and see each other, but it was like send texts back and forth, images, drawings, so we were communicating, but we didn't it would be, there were a few gaps in there where when we came back together, it was like, yeah, that's what we're going to do.
And then I was just like, I'm just going to freaking make these. And let's just make this. And you started on the wood section in the studio, and I started on the clay
we measured,
section.
We kind of decided.
We measured. She
once
measured.
we decided, once we decided, and I made the little, Kristen said, let's just start making it. So I made the little wooden form, and then you measured what the clay forms would be, and Kristen made the.
Do you like my shoes there, you guys? See that?
Oh yeah, the feet. Her feet.
That's good. Yeah. And then we fired at both of the studios. So obviously, this is at my studio on the left, and that's at her studio on the right. And there would be times when we weren't together for a couple of weeks, and I would bring a piece over and say, "Can I just luster this? I'm dying. Need gold. Like, let's get it." And she'd be like, "Yes." Okay. So we were very respectful of decisions. Like I was talking to Ursula, and she said that sometimes when a collaboration would come out of the kiln with her last project in this vein, she would be like, I'm dying here, but had to be respectful of the other partner. And we truly did give and take constantly. Like I would send her, this is a snapshot from my iPhone. Do you like the scale of this symbol? Is this good? And she sent me back to my studio with the pine cone, just the size. It wasn't detailed. And then we were down to business because of,
time was of the essence. We had to get it finished. But then this is when we had the temple form clad with some tile. The tiles created, and then next layer, and that's when the tile from that shrine piece for
that beautiful juicy green. It's got gold flecks in it, so everything was coming into focus.
And then we started thinking about the different sides and how they would. What they would mean, and we decided to make them the cardinal directions, and so that we then start north south, and we started then each of us between us deciding which direction speaks to us. So I did north, Kristen did south. Then we looked at east west, and which one speaks to each one. We just kind of decided which one. So we would do the partnering direction.
Right, and we did a lot of research on symbolism for the cardinal directions and surfaces, etc. And then we used a lot of Angelica's X tiles.
Those are the containers of tiles left over from the that word wall project, and so that's what's on the bottom.
And then put a handle on it. Just saying, if you make something big, put a handle on it.
So that's underneath the little house, and that's how it's all separate for packing purposes. And
then we shipped from my studio because I have a loading dock. And Angelica came to the rescue with the straps because I don't know how to use those damn straps. And then we got it off, and it's here. So that's it.
And that's it in the gallery before the finishing of the installation.
And we're still talking to each other. Somebody asked me, "Are you still talking to your collaborator?" I'm like, yeah, more than ever. I mean, like next time we get together, we said we're not working, we're drinking. Right? We've done that several times.
Yes, we've already done that. And actually, I talked to all the artists. In order to write my essay for the catalog, I talked to each artist. I recorded it, so that I could have ask them questions, had them to explain their process and how it went out and together. And everybody had just a great experience, and just were really grateful for the assignment. And Christine Golden and Susan Biner did not know each other all. One lives in Phoenix, and the other one's in Tucson. I find Christine, she was new to the area, so she said, well, I can maybe ask Susan Biner and see if she would be interested. So that she just, out of lark, just contact her, and Susan Biner, oh, sure. And so they have become fast friends. They found that their work, you look at their work and it looks very different, but they found that what they find in common is concern about the environment. So they say when we get together, we can just talk for hours, just I'm worried about this, and So she found a comrade, someone so on the same page as her. And Sana and Sid, they had known each other since undergrad school. Sid lives in Philadelphia. Sana lives in New York City. And they've seen each other in NCECAs, somewhat contact, but they never really reconnected again after all that time. And they're just they're, just that they're thankful that I gave them this assignment, is that they gave them an excuse to really connect again. And so I think that all the collaborations will, whether they continue as a collaborations, they'll continue as friends and
partners.
Partners. Yeah. So collaborate with someone and you'll make a good friend.
Yeah.